two HODs sitting and a young professor, and I'm going to present my master's thesis. That's how I feel like. Thank you everyone for joining us, and especially Mr. Bhasin, who had a fall, and but he still managed. Thank you so much, sir. It's a pleasure. And ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bhasin and Mr. Pawar were also part of our grand jury who have selected the winners of tonight's award. So thank you so much for that as well, sir. So good afternoon, everyone, once again. And on the stage, we have two stalwarts who have created the companies which define and shape the IT landscape of the country. And we have a person who's trying to crack the most difficult code of India, which is making people invest smartly and parting with their money, which is very and in a correct way possibly. So, and I intend this session to be a sort of a mini masterclass for myself as well, for the audience and myself. So we want to pick up from your learnings, experience, and also understand whether those remain the same today as well. So Mr. Pawar, I'll come to you first. And so when you started, we all, probably everyone in this room knows someone who has either studied at NIT or knows someone who has studied at NIT or is been associated with NIT. And same goes for Genpact as well, to be very honest. So, though you started dabbling, when you started dabbling with tech, India had near zero IT infrastructure. Tell us about the most important things that you had to take care of, the challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome them? Do you think those remain the same today, or looking back, you think you could have done something differently from the present circumstances?
So, all of you guys in media want to dramatize things more than the reality, right? So, I think for me, and I'm sure for Pramod, we were doing our stuff, and then you see some problems, and you heard the old saying that behind every difficulty is an opportunity. So for us, I was involved at that time in HCL. We were building computers, and we knew that computers will be built, they will be sold. And the biggest constraint we anticipated was that the talent required to run them, as well as the limited understanding that leaders would have on what to do with IT, or computers then. So for us, that constraint looked like a very promising opportunity. And me and my co-founder is my batchmate from IIT. He was that time working in Keltron. And so I persuaded him to leave his job. And we figured that if the problem we are solving is the talent problem, then where do we get the talent from to solve that problem? To us, that was the first real issue to look at. And we said that, let's see if technology can be used. So when we launched NIT and we said the use of multimedia, that time we meant a VCR with the video recorder, the big one, with linear video. That was technology at that time. That was multimedia, but we had recorded learning materials at that time. And we never used the word teacher in our whole life. We used the word learner because emphasis was on learning, not on teaching. And we had used systems and technology, and we had young people who were learning coordinators. So they were coordinating the learning process. We were making, we understood quite early on that the challenge is helping people to learn. And if you're going to be dependent on tools and techniques, then the ability of young people to learn given some material is the real problem we're trying to solve. And I think we spend a lot of time thinking about it. But when people say in those days of closed economy, I think for anybody to be adventurous, you couldn't have a safer time than that, because you were the only game in town. So for us, it was in many ways a free play, and took 2 or 3 years for mushrooming to happen. In the beginning, we used to think that competition is a pain, but we figured that if we are the only guys, then how do we do education in what is a regulated area? That was the second big question. And so we felt that many players are in the game, it makes it easier. So we willy-nilly ended up causing many more entities to get created. And a sector was born, in a sense. So the market was there for us. I think we were lucky to get a lot of tailwind. The demand was there. And we just had to make sure we don't make very big mistakes, made mistakes. And the concern for many years was about whether regulatory overreach would happen. So we worked very hard to make sure that the few players who were there, we did a lot of self-regulation. We were mindful. And I think then through the 80s that happened, and then of course 90s was a period when many people here, just youngsters in school days, but the country there was a day when we had no money as a country. And so many of us who were looking for liberalization to happen were held back by people who didn't want that to happen because we didn't know what it meant. So the country had a forced liberalization. And the war cry those days, Pramod would remember, is we were told that we had to give a message of export or perish, right? So that provided a big impetus to our industry, which was young, that time the software industry. Government did everything they could, and we were fortunate to have an exceptional set of bureaucrats. That's normally the other constraint which shows up. So our industry was lucky. We had people like Mr. Vittal, who said, will you do 400 million at a certain point in time, which we imagined we can never do. So we said, we can do. He says, what do you want? And that caused actually a good fillip of liberalization. So I think after that it was just a question of making sure that we are careful, because education is eventually a public good. So the minds of people don't accept education to be profitable. So we had to be very mindful. To me, that was a very big thing we had to worry about. And to this date, we have seen many events where things have gone wrong in the sector. People have not understood the sensitivity. But I think it's been, I don't think it's been a difficult journey, if I can say that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, education, I mean, everyone would think should come free or at very, I think we had a tech session right before this. Separate conversation. Mr. Bashteen, would you want to build up on that? As Mr. Pawar said, that you would agree how this scenario was there, and when you were dabbling at the initial stages, nothing was there. So how did you solve for, and what were the challenges that you really solved for?
Thank you for having us here. Real pleasure. I'm an admirer of Rajay Pawar. I've never told him that earlier, but he built a fantastic institution in India with amazing vision, and which really benefited us also. But I think if I may go a different route, when we first started, it was a bit of a joke, quite honestly, that people thought, as I asked 10 people whether doing outsourced processes from India for the US would work, and all 10 eminent businessmen, industrialists in India said, absolutely not, no chance. Because we didn't have people, we didn't have infrastructure, we didn't have telecom lines, we had untrained staff. If you were going to process mortgages from the US in India, where are you going to find the talent? Who knows what a mortgage looks like, feels like, etc.? What are you going to do in banking circle? So I think the concept at that time was quite preposterous in many ways. Imagine my asking everybody here in India, can I please take your back office processes and do them out of, I don't know, pick a town, Nigeria. How many of you will sign up for that? I'll do it cheaper. Anybody willing? So I think we now take it so much for granted, but the fact is the idea that you can take massive amount of processes, like technology as well, Rajay, of course, bring it to another country and get it done. Technology, not so much because it's not live. Our work is live. We are closing the books of companies. We are doing financial services for banks. We're doing a lot of things which impact people every day. So I think getting that concept through in the minds of US companies and customers. Fortunately, I worked for GE, but even within GE, this was not an idea anybody was willing to accept for a long time. So I think that was one. But two, the other point that I love talking about is Gurgaon did not exist. Absolutely. There was nothing there. I mean, right, this was 96, 97. We all go gleaming houses, etc., but there's a small shed of a warehouse on the highway with a satellite dish on it, and that was a warehouse which we converted to our first office. And we had no telecom lines, no buses, no transportation, no food, nothing to get to the places we want to get to. But we had a great idea. And I think we chased that down. So to be honest, every day was a new problem. Every day was a new disaster. You know, the buses didn't arrive, the food didn't arrive, telecom broke down, dialers broke down, computers didn't come, equipment didn't get, you couldn't find anybody who could cater to 2,000 people breakfast, lunch, dinner. You couldn't find somebody who would come out and repair your equipment at that time. You couldn't find enough trainers to train the people in financial services, mortgages, whatever it may be. We were scouring the world for people who would come in and do that kind of work for us. But the joy of it is that because it was a crisis every day, it gave us a spirit and a culture which was unique, which was one of problem solving, moving fast. We grew very fast in those days. We had a Raman Roy who I had hired, who worked for me, had a great saying. He said, trespassers will be recruited, because we were hiring people in such spades at that point in time. So it was exhilarating. It was fantastic. Gurgaon now is thriving and booming and all of that. Looks lovely. In those days, we used to cross, you know, families of sheep and shepherds and others to get to our office, and you didn't know what was going to happen and how you would get home. But it was a crazy time, wonderful time.
I must admit that I was one of the trespassers. I was barely into college, and I thought I would make some money, and got into outsourcing, calling business for, in college time. So I was one of the trespassers, just to let you know. Yeah. So thank you so much. Arpita, I'll come to you. You heard, two greats and who have created something which we cherish. I know we journalists like to make it a headline, but we cherish what you have created. And especially coming from small town, NIT was like after steno, after typing and, shorthand, that was the next thing that we heard every elderly in the neighborhood doing. So that's why I said my words, and I'm not going to take back, even if you think I am making big words, but that's true. So Arpita, I'll come to you. You heard. So in the wealth management space, in the last 20 years especially, how has the landscape evolved, and what are the opportunities? And you heard that challenges were different at that point in time. How have the challenges, changed now?
Thanks, Saurav, and good afternoon. It's exciting to be here. Reflecting on, I've been lucky to be a part of the wealth management industry for about 2 decades plus, in a large format, large MNC bank as well, and for the last decade or so in a entrepreneurial setup. And it's been exciting to see how things have evolved, obviously across dimensions. And, to simplify, if we were to just pick up just the size of the opportunity, and in a room like this, I don't think I should sort of waste my or spend my breath on how exciting and how large the opportunity has been over the last 2 decades or so. Pick up any newspaper, and India outpacing the growth of most of its peers vis-a-vis historic average at a huge rates, and that's going to continue in 2030. 69% of the population is going to be in the age of 15 to 60. Amongst other things, it's tremendous implications for wealth management as well. And apparently, we are the 3rd largest country with the highest number of centimillionaires. So on one end, that's what's happening on the macro front and the wealth creation front. On the other hand, on the products, client sophistication, client's expectation thereabout, there's been a calibrated switch from the early traditional fixed deposits and insurance schemes to stocks and bonds, to having an open mind to a lot of opportunities that the evolving markets present, which is early stage investing and private credit and liquid alternatives and so on and so forth. So there's been a big evolution, in a manner of speaking, on the products and ideas as well. Obviously leading to a huge amount of the customer segment, which is not a homogeneous bucket out there. That's changed significantly, and you'll have, there some of these stalwarts, people like, Rajesh and Pramod sir, who are here on the panel today, who created businesses, possibly monetized as well. The startup world, India is the third largest, houses the third largest number of unicorns globally to professionals. And the expectation has moved from pure investment advice only to handling complexity across domains, across ideas, across jurisdictions, across generations. And somewhere they're absolutely right to be expecting that. But the most interesting thing is to be able to deal with this opportunity size and this kind of client expectations. How have the business models worked out? And, and that's an interesting nuance, because if you look at people who took a shot at managing money, all of them have antecedents in one of these three formats. The first one being a commercial bank. So you were managing client accounts, you saw money come and go, and you wanted to retain a part of that, and therefore you created solutions to be able to go to the clients and appeal to them so that the money stayed with you. So that's a commercial bank trying to be relevant to the clients, where they were able to see monies in motion. There were investment banks who were working with corporates. Amongst other things, they were monetizing assets, and therefore that was an important opportunity for them to go to. And obviously, there were brokerage firms who were handling transactions and wanting to move the relationship. So every single sort of relevant player in the industry has its antecedents in one of these. I think that's evolved to people being in wealth management as its core mainstay, not as an adjunct to anything else. And committing the resource, time, energy, capabilities to be able to handle the requirements across the mentioned product classes, domains, generations, jurisdictions, and that is its own set of complexities. So it's been 20 years back, I don't think anyone, or 10 years back, family offices and things like that were absolutely not heard of. In a capital-starved country like ourselves, some of these are proxy institutional investors providing the much-needed capital that we need. So it's come a long way. I think it's also, there's a long way to go, and this will not be complete without a mention of two other things. One is obviously technology. What it means to different customer segments is very different, but the single most important thing that's done is democratized wealth, the access to information, the ability to transact, all of that. And obviously across segments is different. And second is a very, very, very proactive regulator support that there is, which gives investors a lot more confidence to tread on that ground. So yeah, it's been exciting, but I think the best years are yet to come. The biggest thing about wealth management is it's not something that leads to instant gratification. A lot of it is about the faith in the process, because things end up being lumpy, things end up being uncertain, things end up being volatile. There's a ton of empirical data to show that if you followed the process, you're going to be okay. The grit or the execution is actually holding the people as they go through that process.
Thank you, Arpita. And I'm sure technology, as it leapfrogs, it will solve a lot of still teething issues that you just spoke about. Mr. Power, I'll come to you. So, the DNA of both NIT and Genpact has been education and skilling. And Arpita just talked about the technology bridging some of the gaps. Very recently, I was at IT and we were speaking, and there arrived a question that still after so many years, there still remains a academia and industry gap. You being, I know you don't want to call teachers, but from the Education Institute, what do you think is still lagging between these are prestigious institutes, IITs, IIMs, and still there, we are looking at new courses which are designed by professionals actually, and not professors, or in conjunction with professors. Do you think that's the solution? What do you think is lacking still in the industry?
So 15 years ago, we set up a university. And let me say, I wanted to figure out why the hell does it work this way. But the gap remains to this day, and it's there in every country. We worked in 40 countries. The nature of gap may be different, but the gap remains. Because I think by the time a person has been through his PhD, he's been so immersed in his own mind in stuff, what he's doing in a very narrow area. And their hunger to pursue on that journey is actually the hallmark of a good faculty member. Now, industry, on the other hand, is trying to apply things today and it changes tomorrow, and then changes day after tomorrow again. So the primary focus of the two entities is different. But we all know that unless the academics work for industry and industry receives from academia, the gap will remain. So this gap remains. Now there are many, many attempts. So for example, at our university, NIT University, which is in Neemrana, we decided that one of the core principles was to make it industry linked, make it, deal with this problem. So we are finding some good ideas, but I can see the difficulty of spreading them all over the place. So for example, every student who does a 4-year program, the last 6 months is in industry. And this is their way to get into industry. But this is also the way, because when a student is doing the industry practice, he is mentored by a faculty member. So there's typically a faculty member having 10 or 15 students who are in industries, different companies, so they get a window into those companies. It's quite a pressure for the director of the institution to ensure that the faculty members are giving time to the students in the factory and talking to their supervisors. It's quite a bit of time. But they're, at least the ones who got into it are suddenly realizing they're connected to the world, for example. And it takes 4 or 5 years for a faculty member to get past that, is the point that I'm really trying to make, right? Similarly, when you look at the industry folks, when they come to universities, they want immediate action. They don't have the patience. They're saying, I've come with a problem, and I have a deadline to meet. And the professor will say, well, I have exams, my students have exams, my primary role is there. So I think these, unless there's accommodation and understanding on both sides, this gap will not go away. All institutions are trying, the newer ones particularly are trying very hard to make this happen. The older an institution is, the more kind of esoteric their thinking is, the more difficult it is for industry to work with them. So it's unsolved problem. There are solutions possible, but we have to be at it. So I think to some extent the gap will remain. And there's some benefit in that, so that researchers can focus on what they have to study rather than keep answering day-to-day questions for production people or shop floor people or business people.
Okay. Mr. Bhasin, do I see an opportunity being thrown out here just right now, as Mr. Rajendra, Mr. Pawar said, that the gap is there and it's going to stay. So as an industry practitioner, what do you think can be done in collaboration with educational institutes in terms of technology which can bridge this possible gap? And is there an opportunity for young entrepreneurs sitting here who can think on those lines probably?
I think I'll take a leaf out of Raj's book on this. I think in some cases the gap has to be there. Because you want researchers and doctorates and PhDs to be able to opine on an industry, good and bad. And for that you need objectivity and independent research. I work with ICREA, the chairperson of ICREA, Economic Research. We have to think very carefully about when we're doing research into a topic, not to be too aligned with an industry, because we need to do objective research and be able to say good and bad, Having said that, there are many areas where clearly our gap should be much lesser than it is in India. I think, Raja, if you look at the US model, etc., it works far more closely with industry. For instance, business schools work extremely closely. Most of the professors do consulting assignments. They sit on boards, they sit on strategic objectives. They talk about business issues as much as to the whole case study notion of teaching is based on bridging that gap, has to be bridged that gap, because you have to spend a lot of time with the industry to be able to teach it. But that applies to business schools. So when you get to commerce or finance or you get to many other areas, again, we have to find better ways of connecting the dots. In India, I would tell you, regulation it hampers that effort because there's a limit, lots of limits as to what professors can or can't do, sadly, which means that they actually can't go out and work with other agencies and do all of those things very easily. They just can't. They're not given that flexibility or freedom in institutions. I wish they would allow that. I do wish industry would also step up much more. We're also involved in setting up a new university called Plaksha in Mohali. It's a science technology university. And we've raised money from a lot of corporates for that. And they're getting engaged with us at the research level, at the lab level, at the student level. So I think this will evolve. I do think in the public institutions that we have, we need to give them incentives and encouragement for that involvement, which I don't think they have today. And you can't expect a professor who's already got a lot on their plate to act very differently unless some of those incentives change, and either because the students need it or because they're able to get a lot more insight and information from industry. And industry also has to change, to Raj's point. You can't demand immediate answers. You want to work with the university, it's going to be a long-term project. And you have to think about it that way. But I think, having said that, I think the gaps are too large, fundamentally. And I think we've all got to work to close those gaps.
Thank you. And I think, Plaksha, you spoke about, we had Mr. Vikchandan here in the morning. He's with Ashoka University. I think the model is pretty brilliant, which is open for learning. I mean, they're not hiding anything. They're open to set up more universities. So I think the gap probably will, with these new age ideas, will lessen in some time. Yeah.
In those areas, absolutely the gap is, like Raj's NIIT University, the gap will close much more. But you know, that's still a small minority. I'm also one of the trustees of Ashoka, but those gaps we close because of the fact that the founders come from a background like Raji and others.
Thank you. So we're short of time, so I'll open with your permission, take some questions probably from the audience. I see a raised hand there. Please introduce yourself. Keep your questions short and within the scope of that discussion.
Yeah, sure.
Please.
Thank you so much. Sir, my name is Mohit Kabra. My company name is Prime Intercorp. I am from Indore. My question is from Pramod sir. When you said that when you asked to 10 person in the beginning of your work, then they denied. So how did you broke the ice and attracted the first customer, and what were the USP you have shown to the others that you are good at this and in compared to the current suppliers in that area?
I have to answer this on your behalf. See, the first set of companies which had to go, and he did it for BPO, was to earn the trust. Earn the trust of the customer, that sitting far away in a place that person has never been to, with people he doesn't know. So I think the trust was built one customer at a time, by one leader at a time. And then they were paving the way for the others. So I have to say that Prabodh is an outstanding person to articulate complex ideas, but more than that, I think he builds relationships with people which are trustworthy. And you'd have to see that the leaders who created and went abroad were people of that type. You couldn't just use your intelligence and throw ideas at people. They had to believe in you. And Prabodh exudes that kind of trust. He brings out the trust in people. So very often we say brilliant people can do a lot of stuff, but ultimately you're dealing with people. And if you're asking them to do something which looks risky, they have to believe in you. So I know Pramod well, and I believe in whatever he tells me, but from the time I met him, I think those qualities were important. What you want to add?
We're very close, dear friends, privileged always to have been able to work with people like Rajan in many areas like NASCOM, etc. But to be honest, exactly right, it's trust. But then so when I first tried this out with my boss at GE Capital, he thought I was mad. He thought this is a stupid idea. He said, you don't have telephone lines. You couldn't talk on phone lines at that time from your home. You had 3 phone lines at home because 1 or 2 were always down. We don't even recognize that there was no mobile phone. So whenever I was calling someone, one phone line would go down. We were experts at repairing our phone line up and down the road. You know, with a little screwdriver and a chabi, we could figure out, कि यहाँ से line गिरी है, वो जरा ठीक करके आओ. So he looked at me and I told him, I said, I want to do this over phone line. He said, you're mad, you can't even have a conversation with him. At exactly that point, the phone line went dead. So I got on to the other phone. And I said, let me experiment. But then you have to make it fail-proof. So the first few things we did so well that we knew it would live or die based on that. So instead of, and we promised them 100% accuracy by triple checking everything. We had 3 checkers. Because I said, I'm not going to take a chance. We triple checked everything. And you built that and then built it over time. But you really had to bear it on trust and rigorous processes. This is not something India Inc. understands very well. How rigorous are the processes that we put into place to make things work. And I think that's something I had learned from GE Fortinet. Sorry.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Those are words of wisdom. And we've run out of time, so we'll like to close it here because I don't want to keep people waiting away from their lunches. So lunch plates. Thank you so much, Mr. Pawar, for joining us. It's an absolute honor to hear from you. And personally also, my family, a lot of people have gone to NITs, worked at Genpact, and now I must tell you, Ms. Vinay, that that's what I'm coming to, is that now I have my younger brothers who are getting into wealth management. This is the new field which they think is this rising sector, because we have been prudent with money, but not the correct way possibly. So that's the way forward. Thank you so much everyone for joining us here. Thank you.